Climate change is affecting all of us in countless ways. But each region of the country and of the world has its big worry, the thing that could cause serious harm, massive damage: drought, heat, wildfires, hurricanes, icebergs melting. In the North Country, it's flooding. Heavy storms are already causing major damage. This summer, not so much. It's been dry, which is why experts say now is the time to prepare for when the rains come. That's today's story of the day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from the Wild Center in Tupper Lake, dedicated to strengthening visitors' connections to the natural world. More at wildcenter.org.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Monday, August 25th. First up, the hospital in Ogdensburg will soon see some physical changes as well as expanded mental health and cancer technology. Claxton Hepburn Medical Center and the North Star Health Alliance will receive a $19 million grant from the State Department of Health. Amy Feiereisel has the details.
The state funding will almost double the hospital's children's behavioral health unit from 12 to 22 beds. It's the region's only acute inpatient mental health facility for children ages 5 to 17. Richard Duval is the president and CEO of Claxton Hepburn Medical Center and the North Star Health Alliance. He says the unit is playing a crucial role in addressing the mental health needs of North Country children.
We have seen tremendous utilization of those services within our community. And the reality is the need is there to have more available inpatient beds.
Since opening in 2022, the unit has averaged a high occupancy rate of around 80%. It served well over 1,500 children.
To get them prepared to either go to other services or back to their homes. And this grant allows us to be able to facilitate the growth of that unit.
The grant will also help create a new comprehensive psychiatric emergency program, which will provide immediate crisis care for people experiencing mental health issues. The goal is to reduce strain on the emergency department. To make room for these expansions, Duval says they need to do some physical restructuring.
We have to relocate services within our hospitals that's currently spread on every floor. We're going to consolidate our acute care medical services to one floor, that being the second floor of the hospital.
He says this will also improve the patient experience and staff efficiency.
So if you're there for a medical need, that care will be provided on one floor instead of having beds on multiple floor or the ICU on a separate floor. It'll all be on one floor for our patients and their visitors.
The grant also funds the modernization of hospital equipment, including what Duval called a needed update in the hospital's cancer treatment center. Duval says the state grant shows a tangible commitment from New York in supporting rural health care. Amy Feiereisel, North Country Public Radio.
A popular hiking trail south of Tupper Lake has reopened after being closed for 2.5 months. In early June, the DEC closed the trail up Goodman Mountain after a bull moose was seen multiple times near the summit, exhibiting unusual behavior. Wildlife biologists and a state veterinarian observed the moose in early August and saw advanced signs of disease, including severe emaciation. The moose was then euthanized. Last Friday, the DEC reopened the trail. Scientists from the state are partnering with Cornell's Wildlife Health Lab to test the moose's remains. In the North Country, powerful storms and the flooding they cause are so far the biggest impacts of climate change. For those along the St. Lawrence River and Lake Ontario, flooding means more shoreline erosion. Catherine Wheeler reports on efforts to adapt before a disaster strikes.
In the summer of 2019, Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River rose about 3 feet above its normal levels, breaking records.
Good evening. A record set for levels on Lake Ontario, and officials warn the peak won't happen for another 1 to 3 weeks.
Docks were submerged. Waves lapped against homes and buildings. People said they'd never seen anything like it.
Water went halfway across our property.
Barbara O'Keefe is the president of the Fort La Presentation Association. She's at Van Rensselaer Point looking out over the St. Lawrence River at the Fort La Presentation Historic Park in Ogdensburg.
To stand here and watch the wind just throw the water over was so frustrating you couldn't do anything about it.
O'Keefe says when the water finally receded that summer, it took about a quarter acre of land with it. She says it inspired the association to prioritize shoreline resiliency. After more than $1 million in construction, this stretch of shoreline is now reinforced with giant rock slabs designed to retain the land that's left. Hardy plants, trees, and grasses line the edge. The shoreline is the backdrop for a park with walking trails, picnic benches, and historic sites. The association's Timothy Kreideman says it has all the components to be a thriving community spot.
We have steps down to the water where you can kayak, canoe, fish, walk, bike, jog, and in the future we plan to have more things on the historic level of building a historic fort and a visitor center.
He says that's why it's critical to make sure it can withstand the flooding that's bound to come. This is the approach experts are hoping property owners and communities along the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River will take moving forward because of climate change.
There's more extreme events, and those extreme events are where the shoreline change happens.
That's Roy Widrig. He's with New York Sea Grant. It's an organization that helps to educate the public, kind of like a Cornell extension, but for shorelines instead of agriculture. Widrig says erosion along the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence River happens in different ways. On Lake Ontario, more extreme storms are making bigger waves. Those waves churn up more sediment and pull it deeper into the lake.
The waves can no longer kick that back up and bring it back to the shoreline on calmer days. So a lot of the sediment that used to be in the shoreline is actually moving out into the lake. It isn't as accessible by the waves anymore. So it's not rebuilding the shoreline as much as it used to.
On the St. Lawrence River, that doesn't happen as much because dams control water levels. Shoreline erosion happens when the river and its tributaries flood, like in 2019. Warmer winters make the coastline particularly vulnerable, says Widrig.
The lakes are staying warmer later, and that is one of the driving forces behind big lake effect events.
Widrig says some years there will be less ice to protect the land from the big waves these storms create. That could wreak havoc on shores.
That's when the waves start pushing the ice onto the shoreline. They scour into the shoreline. They gouge the shoreline.
Widrig says the damage is compounded because people have been building bigger along the shore than they did 40 years ago.
And when you say like, oh, in 1984, we had a little bit of erosion at our cottage. We lost a foot of shoreline. But now in 2024, it's like, oh, we had a foot of erosion and we lost a $80,000 boathouse. And now we have to put in a $60,000 seawall to replace what we lost.
That's what Widrig says he wants to help people avoid. He says while he mostly works with private property owners to come up with natural shoreline stabilization, Sea Grant also supports communities. Municipalities face their own set of challenges as they try to address shoreline erosion. Two major ones are outdated land regulations and building codes and finding the money. New York State has been leaning in to help. After the flooding in 2019, the state allocated $300 million to help tackle coastal resiliency along Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River. There are more opportunities for grants, too, like through the Department of Environmental Conservation and the Department of State. That's something Lauren Darcy with New York Sea Grant can help with. But she says getting communities to focus on and invest in shoreline resilience can be a tough sell when flooding is out of sight and out of mind.
It is not hard to communicate that this is something they should be thinking about, but it can be difficult to get to a point where we can, act on these ideas, given all the competing priorities and sets of urgencies of other things that they need to be worried about.
Back at the Fort Law Presentation Park in Ogdensburg, there's still more that needs to be done.
If you want to get an idea of how erosion got real bad, look at this.
Timothy Kreideman with the association is standing a ways back from the water's edge. Since they tackled the original shoreline stabilization project, they've acquired more land. He points to half-buried remnants of old train tracks hanging over the river's edge. They were once firmly on shore.
It also tells you at one time it was strong enough and secure enough where it ran trains over here. Now, like I say, I wouldn't even walk over there.
Kreideman says the association has applied for more funding and hasn't gotten it, but it's still trying. He says it's essential to make our communities more resilient for the storms to come. Catherine Wheeler, North Country Public Radio in Ogdensburg.
We have more news all the time on our website, ncpr.org. Music today by Michael Farley of Canton and Ben Sharon of Watertown. I'm David Sommerstein, North Country Public Radio.